My name is KJ Berkfolk, and this is my story, my thesis. I'm what universities refer to as a non-traditional student. I didn't start my journey into higher education until I was 32 years old, and as you might imagine, going to university in your early 30s is not an easy task. Enrolling at Public Community College, and later Colorado State University Pueblo, as a 32-year-old woman with classes mostly full of high school age students, took a lot of gumption and drive. I had to overcome feelings of embarrassment and inadequacy, grapple with holding down a job and attending school full time, and refer back to knowledge and skills I hadn't been asked to use in 15 years, while going to class every day knowing that education is the one key that can open the door to my future and let me close the past behind me. I've done it. In spring 2020, this spring, I will graduate as a first-generation college student with my bachelor's in science in criminology with a minor in honors studies, holding a 3.9 cumulative GPA. I have the skills and drive necessary to enter the workforce as a productive and contributing member of society, with one small caveat. I have a felony conviction on my record. I grew up in a very tumultuous household. My parents were both alcoholics and fought regularly, mentally, emotionally, and physically. My father tended to focus his anger on me, while my mother saved her aggression for my younger sister. My mom and dad were codependent drinking buddies, but when they would fight, which was a daily occurrence, my dad needed someone else to party with. The first drink of alcohol I took when I was 12 years old. It was whiskey, and my father gave it to me for the sole purpose of getting me drunk. Drinking with my dad became a nightly activity. By the time I was 14, I had a serious drinking problem. I wasn't what people would refer to as a good kid. I was constantly running away to escape the incessant yelling, fighting, drinking, crying vortex of my home life. While I was gone, my sister would take the brunt of the abuse, which later caused an irreparable rift in our relationship. When I would run away, it was assumed that I was just a troublemaking teenager, drinking excessive amounts of alcohol, trying different types of drugs, and having sex with a man a decade older than me became a normal occurrence. At no time was my home life ever investigated or even questioned, and I didn't know anybody else's home life was any different, so I never thought to advocate for myself and my sisters. Eventually, running away caught up with me, and when I was 15, I ended up in a group home for teenagers where my substance abuse problem was never properly addressed. The program focused on gang prevention, and I was once again dismissed as a teenager who just makes trouble wherever she goes. When I was 19 years old, I got in trouble again. I wasn't even old enough to buy alcohol, but my partner at the time was, and my substance abuse shot through the roof. I would work all day, drink all night, and repeat for days on end. Towards the end of that year, I got into a drunken fight with my partner that landed me in a courtroom again. I was charged with assault as a result of that conflict, and instead of rehabilitation for my alcohol problem, I was given a year in jail and 5 years probation. As before, no one reached out to help me. I made it very clear to the judge that I had a substance abuse issue, but that didn't seem to matter. And when I went to jail, no one suggested I go to a therapist or even asked about my issues. Excuse me. When I pressed, I actually found out the jail didn't even have mental health services because they didn't have it in the budget. So I was given a year to rehabilitate with no method of rehabilitation. Over the next 8 years, I vacillated between periods of alcoholism and sobriety. Unable to make ends meet in the face of rising unemployment and cost of living in California, my girlfriend at the time and I packed up everything and moved to Pueblo, Colorado. I was away from my family and my friends and lived a pretty uneventful life. I would work and drink, and during periods when I didn't have a job, I would just drink more. I knew my drinking was a problem, and sometimes I was able to remain sober, but eventually I always fell back into the same cycle. For years, I was at a standstill. I wasn't bettering myself, but I wasn't actively making myself worse either. In 2011, that all changed. My father passed away suddenly from pancreatic cancer when I was 27, and that sent me into a spiral. My relationship with my father was far from being normal, and a lot of things were left unresolved, so I started drinking heavily again, and about 2 years later, I found myself in trouble with the law. On January 4th, 2013, I got very drunk and blacked out. According to the police report, I drove myself to a restaurant, locked all of my belongings in the car, and told the woman at the cash register to give me some tacos and all of the money in that cash register. The police report claims that I had my 2.5-inch pocket knife out when I did this. The report also states that while I did not threaten the woman, I said I wasn't joking about her giving me the food and the money. I have no recollection of these events. The only memory I have of that night was sitting on my knees, surrendering to a Pueblo police officer. I was taken to the police department and questioned. I don't remember being questioned, and I don't remember signing the form saying I knew what my rights were. According to the police report, I did say that I should maybe talk to a lawyer, but I was never provided with the opportunity to obtain one because I wasn't persistent enough, I suppose. I was booked into Pueblo County Jail on charges of aggravated robbery and menacing with a deadly weapon. My bail was set as $100,000. When I heard my bail, I laughed out loud nervously. Not only was I astounded at the 6-figure number, but there was no way that anyone in my family could afford to hire me a private attorney, let alone pay such a high bail. I was assigned a public defender who spent all of 10 minutes with me. I remember my attorney saying, "You want to take this plea bargain. This judge does not mess around, and if you're found guilty, he will sentence you to the 12 years maximum, with at least 8 years being in prison on a violent charge." I was terrified, so I took the plea bargain, which entailed 4 years in prison with 3 years of mandatory parole. Because of the plea bargain, I never had the opportunity to advocate for myself in court. But with the threat of 12 years, 8 mandatory with a violent offense, and no money to retain a attorney who would actually fight for my rehabilitation, I didn't really see that I had an option. After I was processed at Denver Women's Correctional Facility, I was sent to La Vista Correctional Facility in Pueblo, Colorado to finish out my time. Being sentenced to prison changed my life. While I was at La Vista, I never got in any trouble. In fact, I took classes to become certified to work on computers, which moved up the date I could get out of prison. Luckily, Colorado already has a few rules in place regarding how time is calculated. If you weren't charged with a violent crime and you stay out of trouble while incarcerated, you only have to serve a quarter of your time in an actual prison or jail. If you add that together with the classes I took, I only ended up doing about 9 months in prison. I was denied parole once in October of 2013, and then I was granted parole to a halfway house in November of 2013. The year I spent in the halfway house changed my life even more profoundly. I knew I never wanted to go back to prison, so when nobody offered help getting me access to rehabilitation, I took it upon myself to focus on my addiction. I found a therapist who helped me to change my perspective, getting me to open up about past trauma and begin the healing process. It wasn't easy, and it hurt much more than I thought, but I was able to confront my inner demons and get to the root of my alcohol problem. While seeing my therapist, I also found a psychiatrist who was able to help me. I'd been diagnosed as bipolar when I was younger, but I knew there was more going on than that. In January 2014, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2, post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and adult attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. I started getting my medication sorted out in prison, but with the additional diagnosis, I began a different regimen, which was much more beneficial to me. During my time in the halfway house, I held 2 and sometimes 3 jobs, as well as completed a 12-week substance abuse program, while having regular appointments with my therapist and my psychiatrist. I was granted leave from the halfway house in November of 2014 on an ankle monitor. Per the requirements set by my parole officer, I was released from my ankle monitor in April 2015. Parole continued until November 2016, when I was released early for good behavior. While I was on parole, my parole officer is the one that told me I should go back to school so that I could help others. He thought I had something to offer others and the world, and I can now say he was right. I'm sharing my story with you because my past has shaped my perspective and brought me to where I am now, in my last semester of college, getting ready to graduate with my degree in criminology with a minor in honors studies and a hard-won GPA of 3.93. But this isn't just my story. This is the story of so many people I met along the way. I met people both in the halfway house and in prison who were good-hearted, bright, talented people who, like me, had fallen through the cracks in a well-meaning but very inadequate system. Unfortunately, unlike me, many of them still haven't found their way or gotten the help they need, but some of them have. 2 examples stand out in my mind the most. One of the women I was in the halfway house with was Danielle, and I've changed the names here. Danielle is a hard worker with an obviously big heart. She got out of the halfway house and had a great deal of support from both her family and her husband, who had been incarcerated himself and wanted to better his life. Danielle got a job as a waitress, and her husband worked as a construction worker. Danielle worked hard, got off parole, and bought a house. And I still see Danielle sometimes, and whenever we run into each other, we both reflect on our time in the halfway house and how so many women we know still continue to struggle, such as Sheila. Sheila, name also changed, was another woman I met in the halfway house. She was in her mid-40s and had also struggled with both the law and rehabilitating away from drugs and alcohol. Like Danielle, Sheila was also a hard worker with an enormous heart. She was always available to talk and took care of everyone like they were her daughters. Sheila worked hard and completed the program to get out of the halfway house, but the only place she had to go was back to her abusive boyfriend. She had no family support, negative influences from her boyfriend, and was tasked with trying to better her life with no opportunities readily available to her. Eventually, Sheila failed to be successful and ended up back in prison. The difference between Sheila and Danielle is support and opportunity. Imagine where they might be today if their criminal record wasn't being held against them. Both women were kind, helpful, and caring friends of mine who had struggled with substance abuse issues, but the biggest difference between them is the home they came back to. Danielle had her family to help support her and was able to find transportation to her parole meetings, random UAs, and therapy appointments. She had a husband who was also trying to actively change his life, so they were able to focus on their treatment and hold each other up when they were struggling. Sheila, on the other hand, had no family to help her, and a boyfriend who did not want to change his life, but also worked hard to make sure that she didn't change her life as well. To some people, the solution to Sheila's problem is clear. Leave the abusive boyfriend, get a job, work on yourself. But I'm proof that's always not that easy. For the first half of my life, I struggled with finding any type of support system that could have prevented me from ending up in prison. I was stuck with an abusive and addictive parents who taught me the same life. But when I went to prison, something clicked. I had to make a conscious choice to focus on my own rehabilitation, and it's incredibly difficult, which is why I want to continue helping and advocating for people who were born into or currently live in similar situations. But even with support and drive to improve themselves and their lives, many people, like myself and the friends I made in prison and the halfway house, face additional barriers due to their criminal record. I am lucky enough to have an amazing support system, which has been critical to my success, especially as of late. Life has been extraordinarily hard recently. In early February, my father-in-law passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. This has weighed heavily on my fiancé and I, especially because we've been living with him and my mother-in-law for the past 3 years. Just when things were settling down, Colorado issued a stay-at-home order, which meant the rest of my semester was moved online. My fiancé began teaching online, and because my mother-in-law is at high risk for COVID-19, we've been essentially stuck in the house for months. For the past me, this would have been a recipe for relapse and a disaster. But because I was able to get help when I was in the halfway house, I'm on proper medications, I've gone to extensive therapy, and I have an amazing support system, I am doing well despite difficult times. The hard work I put in would be all but wasted if I didn't have the partner I have and the family I have to support me. I'm about to graduate in less than a month with a bachelor's degree in criminology with a minor in honors studies. Never thought this was possible. And even with all this, it's still going to be incredibly difficult for me to find a job because the first thing that potential employers are going to see is my criminal record. I made the decision to share my story because I would be submitting a legislative proposal to change the way that nonviolent criminal records are being treated by potential employers. This proposal that I'll be submitting will ask Colorado legislators to put forth a bill that would remove many barriers for those with nonviolent criminal records. If this bill were to pass, it would make it so that only law enforcement, certain government agencies, and the court system could see your past record if it was a nonviolent crime. The bill would give people the ability to fully participate in society as positive and productive members on the same level playing field as everyone else. Holding people back and treating them like second-class citizens isn't helping anyone, not the person with the record or the people without. We all have to live in this world together. Don't make nonviolent felonies a life sentence they're not supposed to be. Help your neighbors have the ability to better themselves, and we will all be better off as a whole. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story. Don't forget to keep an eye out for the legislation I will be proposing. Your vote may very well be the defining difference in so many people's lives. I believe that supporting this legislation will have a ripple effect that's positive on society, Supporting this legislation tells people who've made a mistake that people still care about this success. Sometimes that's all a person needs to completely change their lives. Thank you again. I really appreciate you watching.